And your name is You're Wanting. And you can't play in the man's game, you can't close them, then go home and tell your wife your troubles. Because only one thing counts in this life. Get them to sign on the line which is dotted. You hear me, you fucking faggots?
I could share with you the history between Orlando and Pedro. I could tell you that they've had 20 regular season games between them since 2010. Orlando has taken that series 12-8. I could also tell you that they've had 3 playoff matchups, Orlando taking all 3, 2010, 2018, and 2020. In 2010, Orlando won in the second round 93-76. 2018, we'll get to that in just a second. Literally a second. And in 2020, winning in the first round 109-98. We could delve into a pattern of Orlando basically dominating Pedro over the years, but we all know that this is about 2018. Pedro's fantasy mortality must be discussed every round. He won last week when I didn't think he would. Most of the league didn't think he would. And if he makes it past this round, we have to continue to discuss his mortality. We have to do it because this is all a competition. You don't play in a league without money if it's not about the competition, if it's not about the bragging rights. You do not play in this league just for the sake of playing in a league. I do not know what the motives behind the fuckery have been through the years. The trading, empty slots, just an overall feeling of a half-hearted effort as far as Pedro goes with fantasy. We do not know what the motive behind this is. We don't know if it's a troll reaction to I play in 7 leagues, so I don't care what happens in this one, even less because it's not for money. Or, on the flip side, have we given Pedro too much credit through the years to assume that this is a lack of effort when it's actually a whole lot of effort and not a lot of result? His mortality must be discussed because he was the very first champion in this league in 2007. He, of course, is the owner of quite possibly the most illegitimate championship of all time. We all have championships where one of us can look at the other one straight in the face and say that championship isn't as valid as the other ones, and these are the reasons why. Automatically, we say it's not really legitimate because it was the very first year, knowledge was very low, experience was very low, and Pedro won. There were different teams in the league, names that I don't even remember anymore, and it was a different system. The points were different, the players were different. If you win a championship in a particular season, and we are currently in a season where the toys have completely changed. This is a totally different iteration of NFL football. It's just a totally different game. And if you're Pedro and you win it in 2007, you are at the bottom of the legitimacy list. Your championship isn't null and void, not as much as Hensel's is, but it doesn't hold up against everybody else's efforts. So again, this is why we must discuss Pedro's mortality. If he comes to another season making the playoffs, and Pedro does make the playoffs quite often, I don't have the papers for that, making the playoffs and losing yet again, it is another failure on top of another failure and another failure and another failure. Pedro's very competitive. Don't let any of this trollish, LOL, let's talk about bad movies shit fool you. Pedro is extremely competitive. With that comes the memory of 2018. And again, we will discuss the theme of championships that aren't as valuable as others. Orlando's 2 championships have come quite easily to him, at least the championship week. Of course, we remember the Brother Bowl of 2011. We all remember that Joe decided to sit Tim Tebow. He did not play Tim Tebow. He decided to sit Tim Tebow, and Tim Tebow went crazy. I don't remember who he chose. Now, we won't necessarily say that that is to be classified along with the 2018 sit down of Dro, but the fact that it's his brother and the fact that it's Joe, we could easily just assume that in 2011, Joe really didn't give a shit about fantasy. You could argue that Joe minimally cares now. You know, there's like a 30% uptick in interest as far as fantasy for Joe. But in 2011, he really didn't give a shit. And if he just wanted to give his brother the okie doke, he could have. You know, he didn't. I understand. It wasn't collusion. But this is what we discussed in the past about fantasy IQ and the true value of the owner. 2018 was also an easy one. Because, of course, Orlando won 102-60. Pedro did whatever he did, and it was about 2 hours beforehand. Everything was laid out. I even spoke about it and posted in between. In real time, as Pedro's slots were open, I spoke about it and posted it and delivered it to you guys, and still nothing was done about it. You could say that this was collusion on my part. You could say that I was snitching on Orlando's victory that was just afoot, and I wanted to alert Pedro. But it didn't matter because Pedro didn't make the moves. Again, we do not know what the intent behind this is. We do not know if it's trolling. We don't know anything. But what we do know is that Pedro is competitive. And if he's competitive, well, he would have made some moves this week, and it seems like he did. I like what Pedro did here with Zach Moss, and this is going to be the pivotal game. It's going to be the pivotal game because Orlando's not blowing Pedro out, and Zach Moss is playing on a Monday night. He also has the Indianapolis kicker who's playing on Monday night as well. He scored 21 points last week. Pedro's picking him up, hoping that he will duplicate or at least come close to the same amount of production. But back to Zach Moss, the injury to Jonathan Taylor has given the opportunity to Zach Moss and Deion Jackson. Last week, week 15, Deion Jackson got 13 carries for 55 yards. He scored 9 points. Zach Moss, 24 carries, 81 yards, 8 points. Jay, a couple weeks ago, when I lost, questioned why I played Chris Godwin over that fucking Deshaun Jackson wannabe. That's what I'll call him now. The guy from the Eagles, the skinny guy, number 6. Why I decided to sit him and play Chris Godwin. The reason why I played Chris Godwin is because he gets the volume of targets, way more than the Eagles wide receiver. So I decided to go with volume. I knew that the home run ability is much more to the it's leaning towards the Eagles side, but I decided to go with Chris Godwin because hey, he was supposed to be my number 1 after all, and that seems very laughable at this point of the season. Volume matters. Now, this isn't to say that Deion Jackson is going to go right back to getting close to 10 carries and Zach Moss is going to get over 20. You don't know how this is going to work out. This is a big risk that Pedro is taking, and we all know that you do not lose what you don't put in the middle, but you never win much either. I think that's how the quote goes. Pedro's taking a huge risk here with Zach Moss, but I like the risk that he's taking. Of course, he got the points from Juwan Johnson last week, and Trevor Lawrence scored 18 points for him this Thursday up against the Jets. Pedro can't be very happy about the 18 points that Lawrence scored, but then again, Orlando has Geno Smith. Now, Orlando has a lot of close victories in the 2022 season. Week 3, he won by 3 points. Week 5, a margin of 9. Week 6, 13. Week 7 is worth noting because it was the last matchup between Pedro and Orlando. Pedro scored 48 points. Now, he did not leave players out of the slots. He just scored 48 points. So that's worth mentioning. Week 8, Orlando won by 7. Week 10, against Team Bundy, Orlando wins by 9 points. And week 14 against Paul, Orlando winning by a margin of 4 points. I say that to reiterate what I said earlier, that Orlando is not blowing out Pedro. I can reassure you of one thing. The final score to this game, you ready? The final score to this game isn't going to be 123-72. That's not going to be in favor of Orlando. That's not going to be the final score in this game. Nor am I saying that it's going to be a margin of 4 to 5 points. But Orlando has Geno Smith, and Geno Smith's high was 30. That was many, many weeks ago. He is going up against the Kansas City Chiefs, so that's a good matchup there as far as game script goes. The Giants and the Vikings going up against each other, and I don't know how this fares normally. Maybe you guys are more observant about these kind of things. You can see the pattern where it plays out with 2 of your running backs going up against each other. If one team scores a certain amount of points, it's just absolute at that point. It's just mathematics as far as what your opposing running back isn't going to get. I'm not going to go into the details of Orlando's lineup. I've told you how I feel about Christian Watson. I believe I had. Christian Watson, of course, being the #1 waiver pickup this year, in my opinion, and that, of course, will be solidified if Christian Watson gets a huge game 1 o'clock tomorrow up against the Miami Dolphins. After telling you all the details and what I believe about the teams, I don't believe that Orlando is a strong team. I don't believe that Orlando is here because he was one of the dominant teams. Those were 6 victories with less than 10 points being the difference for Orlando. He's gotten by with many victories. It's very similar to what Pedro, and Orlando knows what I mean when I say this. It's very similar to what Pedro's done over the past 2 seasons. Pedro just slithers by with these little Monday night matchups, and Orlando's kind of done that this season. I'm not going to say that Orlando's team doesn't deserve to be here, but I will say that Orlando's team isn't his record. Pedro, your mortality. That's what this is all about week 18. Disregard everything that I've said. Ignore everything that I've said. The only thing that matters here, and this is the beauty of our league since we have so much history. 3 to 4 people in this league will agree with me. The only thing that today is about between Pedro and Orlando, it's not about this year's championship. It's about Pedro giving Orlando a championship. Now, I discussed last week that we all knew at that time the Green Ranger, and that's actually kind of eerie that Green Ranger was your last championship name, Orlando, and the Green Ranger takes his own life not too long ago. We all knew that the Green Ranger was the better team in 2018. But for me, there is an honor system to fantasy. There's some sort of an honor system. We have to stick to those honor systems and show up even when we know we're going to get our asses handed to ourselves. We don't know what would have happened that afternoon if Pedro would have started his lineup. Orlando scored 102 points in 2018. It is not impossible to score more than 102 points. Pedro could have quite possibly been walking into his opportunity for his 3rd championship here. That's what 2018 means. It means so much when you flat leave someone for a championship game, there's so much that you change. It has like a butterfly effect nature to it. It's just one single detail left out, and it changes the entire course of fantasy history. Orlando is the winningest team in fantasy as far as regular season goes. Pedro has done nothing in over 10 years in this league, just consistently making it to the playoffs. That's about it. The Steelers made it to a lot of playoffs. They won one championship every 10 years or so. That's fine. You're competitive. You care. This afternoon, I predict Pedro defeating Orlando. That's my prediction. I will not say scores, but I do believe that even though Christian McCaffrey and James Conner don't have the greatest of matchups, Pedro is going to pull this victory off. But a huge part of this victory this week depends on Zach Moss. If Pedro is indeed playing Zach Moss, I don't know. See, this is the tough decision for Pedro. The tough decision here is Leonard Fournette. Leonard Fournette is playing Sunday at 8:20, the 8 o'clock game tomorrow night. Pedro's sitting him down. He's not injured. He's not questionable. This is a decision. Now, Leonard hasn't done much over the past month or so. I don't even know. Even worse than that. I'm sorry. Oh, God. Even 5-9. There was a bye week. He was injured. 7-4-7. And now they're going up against the Cardinals this week. What if Leonard Fournette scores 20 points, gets 2 red zone touchdowns and, catches a long pass here? What if? We don't know. That's the risk that we take. Pedro will advance to the fantasy championship.